Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on supporting female survivors of modern slavery in the UK. This webinar is being jointly hosted by two anti-slavery charities, Unseen and Justice in Care. And as charities, we work closely both together and with police forces, as we're passionate about doing all that we can to collectively find solutions to bring an end to modern slavery. And this webinar reflects that commitment to collaboration and partnership. For those who don't know, my name is Charlotte Refusis and I'm Head of Partnerships at Justice in Care. And it is great to see so many of you on the call today from a variety of backgrounds. We've got supporters here from both Unseen and Justice in Care, so welcome to you. And we also have representatives from government, from the police, other charities, and frontline workers. So welcome to you all, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm going to just give a couple of moments for others to join the call before I introduce today's panel. So in the meantime, we'll just cover a few bits of housekeeping. And firstly, just to let you know that we will be recording this session and we'll share it afterwards, but your mics and cameras are already turned off, so there is no problem there. And you are also invited to post questions for the panelists to answer towards the end. And you can do this throughout the webinar by writing in the Q&A box. I've been told to specifically let you know it is the Q&A box and not the chat box to write your questions into. And please don't wait until the end to do this. We generally find that there are more questions than we can answer, so get your question in early and we will come to as many as we can in the Q&A section. And finally, I will be keeping us to time and we will be ending just before 1 p.m. today. So to give you some context for this webinar, today is International Women's Day, and this is a global day where we celebrate the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women. And it also marks a call to action for accelerating women's equality. Many of you will know that there are an estimated 50 million victims of modern slavery globally. Data shows that there are at least 100,000 victims of modern slavery in the UK, and the majority of victims globally are women and girls. Thousands of women and girls in the UK are being abused, raped, and forced into sexual exploitation, or are being trapped in domestic servitude and forced labour, robbed of their freedom and dignity. But today, we don't just want to focus on the fact that the majority of victims are women and girls, as this webinar is an opportunity to celebrate some of the amazing women who are making a difference in this fight against modern slavery and the organisations that they're involved with. So these people are bringing freedom, they are taking on the criminal networks and supporting women and girls, as well as, of course, men, to go on the journey from victim to witness to survivor. And today we're also going to be celebrating women and girls who are survivors who have used their voices and been empowered in the fight for freedom and justice. All the organisations, Unseen, Justice in Care and the police forces on this call work together. And to give you just one example of this, I was hearing just yesterday about an ongoing case in Scotland where a member of the public had concerns about exploitation and they called up Unseen's modern slavery helpline. And this intelligence that was given then led to the police going to the property of concern along with a Justice in Care victim navigator. And there they found a victim of labour exploitation who was being abused, plied with alcohol, and was being forced to sleep on a mattress under the stairs. That victim was rescued and is now being given specialist support by the victim navigator. And the victim is also now engaging with the police investigation. So this is just one example that demonstrates the importance of working together with us all each playing our part in this process. So I am delighted to now introduce our brilliant panel. Firstly, we have DS Emma Rickard, who leads the modern slavery and child exploitation team at the Metropolitan Police. She's worked on modern slavery investigations for over 10 years and joined the Met Police Partnerships team 2 years ago. Secondly, we've got Natasha Mitra, who is head of helpline services at Unseen. Her background is in criminal justice, and she's worked in both the domestic abuse sector as well as with prisoners and their families in custody and in the wider community. And then we did have advertised on the webinar invitation Julie Curry, but Julie can't be with us today. And so Debbie Lloyd has very kindly joined the call. Debbie is the European Programme Manager at Justice in Care, and she oversees our team of 14 navigators across the UK and Romania. And Debbie has 30 years of experience in the police, and before stepping into her current role, she was one of the first victim navigators at Justice in Care. So thank you all so much for joining me today. And Emma, I would love to turn to you first. So you're a detective sergeant in the Metropolitan Police. So just set the scene for us. What are you seeing in the UK, particularly with the exploitation of women, and how widespread is this?
Thank you, Charlotte. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining as well. As Charlotte mentioned, I have been in the police for a long time now, but I've spent most of my career, well, a lot of my career working within modern slavery, something I feel massively passionate about, to get anyone out of modern slavery and safeguard them and prosecute the people that are involved is something that we work tirelessly to do here. So throughout my years, I've been to many brothels, many situations of some, domestic servitude, labour exploitation, now bars, and modern slavery comes in so many different forms, and so many times it's hidden. In London today, I had a little look actually, there's a lot of women that work within the sex industry, they're advertised online. And today alone, there in London, there are 3,800 women advertised on one adult service website alone. And there's like at least 50 that cover London. So you can see how many women are working within that industry. Of those women, just to kind of break it down so people understand, there are over 1,200 Brazilian female sex workers in London today advertised, over 700 Romanian and over 500 Chinese female sex workers, and also interestingly nearly 300 transsexual sex workers advertised in London today. And I just wanted to kind of flag those figures to you to show you what we are looking at and what we deal with day in, day out, and how many girls and women are advertised in London. These three nationalities that I mentioned are unequivocally the rising nationalities we see sex working within London today. Most definitely Brazilian are what we most encounter the most within brothels. I want to also mention there's kind of a rise once again, very sadly, with on-street sex work within parts of London, which, although we do a lot of visits to brothels and off-street, we call it, there is a huge number of girls that sadly work on the street, which is some of the most kind of like dangerous forms of sex working there is. But not just that, I want to talk about mention the domestic servitude, which is very much not just women, but also men, but people that are hidden in plain sight in someone's house that they kind of, you know, many people don't even know they're there, but they're not paid. They're working, you know, huge hours every single day and treated really appallingly. And sadly, through the years in this crime type that I've looked at, I found women that have been sleeping in sheds, in back gardens, all sorts of awful conditions. And then also to mention as well around labour exploitation and specifically kind of now bars as well. We see a lot of women exploited within the now bar industry and car washes, whether it's restaurants, hotel industries, and sadly it is in so many different industries within this country and certainly within London as well that we see daily. So I suppose they're like my kind of main figures to mention as well. The national referral mechanism and the figures from that have increased exponentially. From about 2016, there was about 3,800. And then last year, there was nearly 17,000 people referred into the national referral mechanism, which I think is brilliant because it's such a wonderful package that can be wrapped around these people and help them and safeguard them. But it also just goes to show the number of people that are coming forward and that are caught up in slavery and servitude. Okay, Charlotte.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. And
You're welcome.
You've mentioned that it's not, of course, not just women who are being exploited in modern slavery, and we know this isn't a crime against just women, and globally the majority of victims are women and girls. But as you've mentioned, that figure with the national referral mechanism, with 17,000 referrals over the last year, the majority of people entering that system are actually men. Can you tell us a bit of why this is?
Well, I think it's something like 78% of that figure within the national referral mechanism are males, which is huge, leaving just kind of 22% of females. Whether it's those that come forward more or feel more confident to come forward to say that they're a victim, it's hard to tell. Through the years, it's very hard to get people to always understand that perhaps they are a victim of slavery and servitude. Sometimes we go into the most appalling situations and we find people in the most like heartbreaking situations that they have been caught up in slavery and servitude, and then sadly they don't even see that they are. So it's also a real battle, and for an adult to go into the national referral mechanism, you have to consent to that, and if you don't consent, then first responders can't enter you into that national referral mechanism. It's different if you're a child. But one thing I will point out on that is that the duty to notify have risen really, really well, which I think is such a positive thing. So just for those that don't know, a duty to notify is when, say, we as police officers go into a venue and we think that somebody is potentially a trafficked victim of whatever form of exploitation it might be, but they don't want to consent, we then put a referral in, and they have risen. I think in the last quarter, up until December last year, I think there was up to nearly 4,500. I think that's a really positive thing, that people are spotting those signs more, and instead of speaking to someone and they say, actually, we don't want to know, we're fine, we're okay, we're then taking it upon ourselves to flag it and raise it, which I think is great.
It's really good. And Emma, what does the typical exploitation of women look like? Probably a lot of us have in our minds that it's sexual exploitation. Is that what you're seeing most of in London?
It's a mix. It's a mix between sexual exploitation and, like I said, certainly on street, which is awful, and in brothels. It's something that we deal with every single day here, but it's not to forget the labour exploitation within nail bars, car washes, restaurants, hotel industries, whether it's people that are cleaning, that sort of thing. It's something we see daily, and especially domestic servitude, which is very hard to kind of pinpoint and find a lot of the time. But I suppose, you know, we are very much reliant on other agencies as well, that go into properties, perhaps, you know, whether it's a plumber or something very simple like that, or a builder that goes in and finds a situation, a woman is sleeping in a shed, for example, or a woman sleeping on a floor, or a male for that reason. You know, tell us, report it. It's the hidden crime, and it's so desperately sad as well. Through the years, I've dealt with a woman that was slept in a shed for 3 years, and she was held in servitude for 6 years. And it wasn't until kind of, fortunately, I think it actually came through the Modern Slavery Helpline, that referral, that we then was able to kind of go and find her. But it took 4 attempts to get her out of that address and for her to actually realise that she was a victim of domestic servitude.
Emma, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is a great moment to bring Natasha in to hear more about the Modern Slavery Helpline. So Natasha, you're from Unseen, and one of the key things that Unseen does is run this national helpline, which is a way of people reporting their concerns, like the plumber that Emma referred to. So Tasha, tell us more about the helpline. What is it for and who can use it?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to participate today. So Unseen started the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline in 2016. So we're, I believe, in our 7th year now. So we're a UK-wide service, but we also take international calls. We can be contacted 24/7 for free by phone. We have an online web form, and we also have the Unseen app, which I recommend everybody downloads. As well as a way to contact us, it also includes a guide on spotting the signs. We have highly trained specialist staff who are ready to handle contacts from a wide variety of people. So that tends to include potential victims looking for support, whether they're in a situation of exploitation or after they've left, concerned members of the public who potentially seen something that looked a bit suspicious or concerning, businesses wanting to tackle issues in their supply chains, and also professionals. So we get a lot of statutory agencies and frontline professionals wanting advice. We are also confidential and independent. So that helps callers feel safe to share information with us that they wouldn't necessarily feel able to share with statutory agencies. So, for example, individuals with insecure immigration status or who may have been involved in criminal activity during the course of their exploitation. The support we offer is victim-centred and trauma-informed, which means we provide the potential victim with all the available options and work with them at their own pace and empower them to make informed choices about what they'd like to see happen in their lives. We also offer live interpreter services in over 200 languages. So we can have a 3-way conversation with somebody in their first language. And we also, as you mentioned, we work collaboratively. So we work alongside and make referrals where appropriate to a lot of organisations. So a lot of police, local authorities, UKVI, GLAA, HMRC, some other NGOs as well. And also data is huge for us. We have a very large and unique data set. So we capture around 40 to 45,000 records annually, which is quite a lot. So we record all kinds of things, demographic information on the point of contact, the potential victims, the exploiters, the relationships between them, the location of the exploitation, the industry, what recruitment tactics we use, the methods of control, vulnerabilities, all sorts of things.
Brilliant. And Natasha, of these 40 to 45,000 records that you gather, what has the helpline uncovered about the types of exploitation that affect women?
Yes, could we skip to the next slide, please? Got some stats for you here. So we're just working on our annual assessment for 2022, which is a project we do at the end of each year, looking back over the previous 12 months. So I don't have any figures from 2022 at the moment, but I've got some numbers for you here from 2021 around what we saw in relation to female victims. So the helpline recorded a total of 958 potential victims of modern slavery who were reported to be female. And that equates to 32% of all potential victims indicated, and that's across all exploitation types. But in reality, that figure could actually be significantly higher, because we broadly see similar numbers of males and females indicated, but then we also have a third which where the gender is unknown, because we record gender conservatively. So unless we're told somebody's gender, we won't assume and record it as unknown. So yeah, 32% were recorded as female, but it could be higher. We did see more minors indicated in situations of modern slavery were reported to be female than male. So girls made up about 31% of minor potential victims. But again, that could be significantly higher if you factor in the unknowns. If you have a look at this pie chart, you can see a breakdown of female potential victims by exploitation type. So as you can see, more than half of the females indicated to the helpline 54% experienced sexual exploitation. So if we go to the next slide, we can have a closer look at sexual exploitation and domestic servitude, which is where we see females most represented. So as I mentioned, if we look at all exploitation types, we see similar numbers of men and women, but with sexual exploitation, although anyone can be a victim, we saw a staggering 94% of victims were reported to be female, which is just huge. And then out of all the potential victims that were female minors, 86% were experiencing sexual exploitation. So that's the vast majority of girls indicated to us. And we have seen an increase in sexual exploitation each year since 2019. It goes up and up. And the most common locations of sexual exploitation that we see are private residences and also online exploitation. So online platforms play a really significant role in recruiting and exploiting women and girls into sexual exploitation. So often that is through social media platforms and also adult services websites. And then also domestic servitude, we see a lot of women. So 65% of potential victims of domestic servitude indicated to the helpline were reportedly female. Domestic servitude is also where we saw the highest proportion of female potential exploiters indicated, so 29%. So if you think about the dynamics of domestic servitude, it's occurring in a household with often two or more exploiters. So sometimes it's a couple or maybe a family. So interestingly, it's also the only exploitation type where we saw more potential exploiters than victims.
Natasha, can I just interrupt you there just to
Yes,
ask,
please.
we are going to come to the Q&A later, so I'm cheating slightly, but we've had a question from Joe that I think is really relevant now. Can you just explain the difference between domestic servitude and domestic abuse? Yeah,
absolutely. So domestic servitude is generally somebody who works for a family in a private setting and is abused and exploited by one or more people. So often they'll be doing things like cooking, cleaning, caring for children, that kind of thing. Whereas domestic abuse is more related to kind of familial relationships where one person abuses another. But there is quite a lot of crossover. Often both can be taking place at the same time.
Thank you. And what is the value of the helpline to the police?
The value to the helpline to the police is huge. So aside from the survivors that we support, the police are by far the biggest beneficiary of our information and referrals. So we work with them in quite a few different ways. We send safeguarding referrals. So often that will be situations where we have very limited information, but there's been some suspicious activity or welfare concerns raised. And they could also be linked to modern slavery situations. So for example, there was a situation where we received an anonymous web form about a woman crying and being guarded by another woman at an address. So although that was limited and we couldn't assess it to be modern slavery, we sent a safeguarding referral to the police. Because you never know if a little nugget of information might be the missing piece of the puzzle. So that in that instance, they probably attended the property and conducted a welfare check. We also send information referrals, and those really are to aid possible ongoing investigations. So an example, we had a member of the public call the helpline concerned about a friend of theirs, and the woman was being forced into providing sexual services for the financial gain of 3 men. So the woman in question had been trafficked around to multiple locations. So we referred that to multiple police forces with the names of potential exploiters and the addresses where she'd been held. We also work with the police on extractions. So that tends to be when a potential victim is in a situation of modern slavery and they've indicated to us that they would like assistance to leave. So we had an example where a young woman, I believe she was 19, called the helpline. She'd been groomed as a teenager. and was being exploited by a man that she believed to be her boyfriend and an associate of his. So she'd been wanting to leave for a long time, but she really feared repercussions. So we worked with her and the police to extract her from that situation, and she was moved to a place of safety. We also work with the police to ensure that survivors are able to access ongoing support after they've left situations of exploitation. So we often will refer to the police as a first responder to request that they enter the potential victim into the national referral mechanism so they can receive that ongoing support through the government scheme. So we had a woman contact the helpline after escaping from a situation of domestic servitude. She had worked abroad and then in the UK for a family caring for their child. I don't think she'd ever been paid. She'd never had a day off. Situations were less than desirable. So with her consent, we referred her case to the police, requested that they acted as first responder, and she was able to receive that ongoing support.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Natasha. And there's going to be a chance to hear more about Unseen later during the Q&A. And we are having lots of questions already coming in, so keep posting them and we will come to them in a moment. But I'm now going to turn to Debbie. So Debbie is one of my colleagues at Justice and Care. And she is overseeing the Victim Navigator programme, which is our flagship project in the UK. So Debbie, for those who don't know, can you just give a brief overview of the Navigator programme and how it supports survivors in the UK?
I can. Thanks ever so much, Charlotte, and everybody else for being here today. Especially, I don't know about the rest of you, but where I am, it's like snow and it's horrible outside. So it's lovely all to be sat in the warm and sort of having a nice conversation. So thanks ever so much for everybody for coming along. So the Navigator programme sees individuals embedded within police forces, whether that be with Emma's team in the Met Police or various other locations. But the idea really, sort of broad headlines, saving as many lives as possible. So supporting and rescuing victims, providing long-term specialist aftercare, and that end-to-end sort of support that a victim needs when they're identified by Emma's team. A navigator, for example, will go along and provide that welfare and that initial engagement to help them feel sort of relaxed and comfortable enough in order to be able to engage with the criminal prosecution. And that leads then into sort of helping to dismantle those criminal networks by keeping the victims and witnesses engaged with that criminal justice process. And a lot of us on this call will know how long that journey can be, several years sometimes. And that's really hard for people to remain engaged with a system that they don't maybe necessarily understand completely, but also to get on with the rest of their lives. So the Navigator helps support both sides of that journey. And then also to achieve sort of systemic change on the broader playing field, so to speak. So that the frontline work that the navigators do is then fed into governments and agencies so that we can start looking to fight modern slavery on that larger scale. So that survivor engagement piece I talked about a minute ago is, as I say, is supporting the police's efforts in bringing exploiters to justice through supporting survivors. And that's around establishing greater trust between the survivors and the police so that they can tell their story and feel empowered to tell their story. And it's equipping police officers as well around providing that strategic advice on victim engagement. So when Emma and her team, and Emma's team is really good at this, but that victim engagement piece at that initial point of contact is sometimes quite hard for police officers who maybe don't do it as often as some of the teams that we work with. So the navigators sort of will provide that advice and support and that background information that might help with that initial engagement piece, giving tactical advice around you know, for example, the right type of food to provide for a victim that has sort of come out of exploitation, that might not have had access to lots of sort of basic needs, to look at training, because what happens is the navigators become quite specialised in just looking at the various forms of modern slavery. which then they can impart that information back into the policing teams that they work with. And then looking at tailored support for each survivor that we engage with, to make sure that all the women that we engage with are able to access all the support services that are particular for their specific needs. And I noticed, because I was just having a little scroll through, one of the questions in your Q&A was around sort of providing how does somebody with mental health conditions access the NRM? And once the navigator is engaged right at that beginning, it's about identifying those needs and those sort of requirements of each individual, to making sure that they provided that right support. And sometimes for some people it takes a little while, and sometimes for other people it's straight away. They want to engage with the process, so the navigator is able to help with that journey, really. And it changes all the time. There's never a one size fits all for victims. Just because you might take, for example, half a dozen women out of a brothel, they're not going to all have the same needs. They're all going to have different needs and complexities. And the role of the navigator is to support the police in identifying those, and then hopefully sort of signposting or engaging with other services to provide those right and appropriate services for each of those individuals, so that they can continue that criminal justice journey with sort of Emma's team, or whichever police force we happen to be working with. So I think that sort of covers where we're at.
That's great. And today we also really want to celebrate survivors who have used their voices to stand up for justice. And Debbie, can you just give us one example of a case that our navigators have worked on where they've supported a female survivor to use their voice to see justice?
Yeah, definitely. So a really good example, and again, because Emma's on the call here, is a case that the navigators that work with Emma's team have been involved in. So that's the case of, and I might say this wrong, Emma, so you'll have to forgive me. Is it Shahan? And this chap,
Shaheen.
Sorry,
Shaheen.
Shaheen. So this is a case of sexual exploitation, which is one suspect, so one male, and 8 women that we ended up attended court at the end of last year. Attended court in London at the end of last year, and where a trial took place. The phone records, although we only supported eight women, was that there was over 300 girls potentially involved in this this case, with the final sort of hearing, so the final sentencing being in February of this year. So the case itself has been investigated for a long time. As I say, the navigators were involved since 2021. There was a lot of pleas entered, but 8 individual girls gave evidence. So this offender approached these women in their early 20s via job adverts, offering them work as high-class escorts in return for about £500 a day. Now, then a lot of them were students, and they come from a variety of social and economic backgrounds. So that, again, as I go back to, there's not a one-size-fits-all, even with your victims before you get to that point of exploitation. But there's a degree of vulnerability, and that's the thing that offenders and perpetrators have in any type of exploitation, is to being able to almost identify that vulnerability. They're looking for it. They know what they're looking for the crime that they're trying to perpetrate. So the type of support that was offered in that case over the last couple of years has been from counselling to offer these girls support around employment and ongoing employment issues, helping them with housing, so engaging with local housing providers, emotional support, supporting them dealing with low-level criminal matters. A couple of the girls had a couple of issues that they had to attend court themselves, so the navigators were able to support them through that process, as well as making sure that they were able to engage with the authorities around their EU settlement status, and making sure that all the right people were informed, all the right forms are completed, that general day-to-day managing is what the victim navigators were able to do, and they're sort of helping them now support with their CICA claims to make sure that they're able to engage with that process in order to achieve compensation. Now then, the trial's concluded, as I say, the sentences was in February, but the support is ongoing. But the level of the sentence, and again, this goes back to one of the questions I think is on the Q&A. There were 8 counts of rape, 4 counts of assault by penetration, 3 counts of sexual assault on females, 7 counts of controlling prostitution for gain. And this man received 31 years in prison as a consequence. Now then, there was a massive, obviously, amount of work that Emma's team and the investigative teams put into that process. But a great part of that is the support that the navigators have been able to provide in order to keep those victims engaged with that on that journey. And as I say, that support is ongoing, even though the prosecution phase has finished, although there's a couple of elements still ongoing around sort of compensation and cryptocurrency being seized and asset recovery. And there's real hope that at the end of his sentence, so at the end of that 31 years, this man will be deported from the UK because he's not a UK national as well. So it's a holistic package that we offer, which again is very different on each case, but that's a quick sort of run around of just one of our cases.
Thanks, Debbie. And being part of the Justice and Care team, it has just so inspiring seeing all the different bits of support the navigators have given to these 8 young women to get to this point. But I'm going to keep us moving because we've got lots of questions coming in. So I'm just going to have one more question for you, Emma, before we come to the Q&A. And just want to touch on cross-sector partnerships. So how important is the role of charities in supporting you as a police officer and your team to see the end of human trafficking?
Well, it is unequivocally so important. I'm proud to say that some years ago we realised that we couldn't do it on our own as police, and not too proud to admit that either. But with the help of charities and NGOs, I think it's been like a miracle. And I'm so fortunate that I have the victim navigators sat within my team. So if we go out and visit a brothel or a now bar where we think there's potential exploitation, then the victim navigators will come along. If there's cases where we identify victims, survivors, then I can link in the victim navigators with them, and absolutely it has made such a difference. Time and time again, victims of modern slavery don't want to always talk to the police, whether it's bad experiences from their home countries or whether it is their traffickers constantly telling them and grooming them that the police will arrest them or deport them, or the police can't be trusted. They have sadly not always the strength or the courage to come forward and speak to us. So with the victim navigators and so many other NGOs out there, we are lucky that we can provide that service through us as well, and we can link in, and we work so closely every day. They kind of sit in our office and we go out together and we work together. I mean, it's just such an amazing partnership that we have. And also another kind of really key thing to point out is that sometimes, sadly, and I wish it was more, it's not always possible to secure convictions and prosecute these offenders and these awful people. But sometimes some of the most wonderful results are safeguarding and getting these women out of the situations, women, females, girls, and men as well, out of the situations they're in, safeguarding them and sometimes repatriating them or getting them into other forms of work or education or whatever it may be. And sometimes they're the successes as well, which is absolutely helped by the NGOs out there.
Thank you, Emma. And I know from speaking with you that people reporting their concerns to the Modern Slavery Helpline is also vital for you as police forces in the fight against modern slavery. Can you just briefly tell us about the difference that makes?
Definitely. I'm all too aware that people don't always want to report to the police. They don't always want to involve us and talk to us. And do you know what? That's fine. I understand. But if there's something there that's concerning you, then please ring the Modern Slavery Helpline. That's what they're there for. Ring Crime Stoppers. It will eventually filter its way to us anonymously, but we can then go and do something about it. So please, yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I could ask questions all day, but I'm going to go now to lots of the questions that have been coming in through the Q&A box. So we won't get to every question, but please keep posting them and we'll cover as many as we can. But let's start with a question from Katie, which actually links to what we were just talking about. And this is a question for Emma, but others may want to chip in as well. Can you share some of the telltale signs which we as the public can look out for? What should we be looking for before we then call up the Modern Slavery Helpline? So Emma, let's come to you first on that.
So each form of exploitation is very different. So if you're talking about, I don't know, say you go into a car wash, for example, prices, look at the prices. If you're going into one car wash and you can get your car washed for £15 and there's lots of people kind of stood around, not in very good clothing, like looking tired and exhausted, quite often you'll find that there's containers out the back that are used to house these people in, sadly, as well. If they've not got proper clothing on, protective clothing, wellies, that sort of thing. If you're faced with that, as opposed to the car wash that might charge £30 to get your car washed, start thinking, could there be signs of exploitation here? If you're going into nail salons, think about people that kind of ushered into the corner, aren't talking much, don't have eye contact. Brothels, if you've got a brothel that's nearby or something that you think is standing out and perhaps not right, then think about constant visitors to that door. Are you seeing lots of men arriving throughout the night, throughout the day? Do you see women kind of popping outside in perhaps dressing gowns or like not kind of full clothing? Also, one other thing, within nail bars, you should have certificates displayed everywhere across the walls that they're all licensed nail technicians. If that's something that you're not seeing, then that's another red flag to watch out for. And then I think the one that I always think is I've mentioned several times already, the kind of the hidden in plain sight is the domestic servitude. So there was a case recently that we're working on at the moment, and it's subjudicial, so I won't go into too many details, but a woman was held for 23 years in domestic servitude. She slept on a floor, and sadly the neighbours referred to her as the slave, the modern slave. And it's things like that. They'd see her once a week go out and empty the bins and stuff, but then would never see her. She was never allowed out in the house. I think that builders went in and they reported seeing her kind of sleeping on the floor. So, you know, it's kind of, if you're that neighbour that lives next door to something like that, keep an eye out. If you see in those red flags someone that's kind of kept hidden away from most of the world most of the time, then they are the things to report and look out for. I'm sure there's plenty more. Yeah. I could probably ramble on for ages.
And there's more information on both Unseen. Of course, go to the Modern Slavery Helpline website as the first port of call here. Justice and Care also shares some spotting signs, linking you, of course, to the Modern Slavery Helpline. So do have a look, and we'll share the number after this call for you to all save in your phones as well. We've had a question from Pete about perpetrators and the percentage split of people responsible for these crimes who are female. So Debbie, going to come to you for that. Who are the perpetrators, and are women involved with human trafficking?
I think Emma and I can probably answer this jointly, but there's a lot of underreporting in regard to female perpetrators. There's still a I think a misconception maybe that females wouldn't be involved as perpetrators. I think probably both Emma and I would suggest that that's not necessarily the case, and certainly with sexual exploitation in brothels, there are a lot of female perpetrators that don't always get identified. I think that's quite similar with a lot of crime types. So I don't know the exact stats. Certainly at the moment, if you were to look at the statistical breakdown, men are much higher than females. But I think it's I think it's I don't know if cultural is the right word, but it's certainly it's harder for people to accept that women are offenders in this particular crime type, because women are seen as nurturers and carers, and actually that's not really the case. I mean, Emma, I think, would you agree with that? Or
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, sadly, through the years in many kind of brothels, you have kind of come across women that I think a lot of the time they were often sex workers and perhaps trafficked a number of times themselves. But then we kind of often refer to them as alpha females. They get to a slightly, well, a higher status within the organised crime groups, and then they turn to more perpetrators, and they, you know, they then become sadly involved in trafficking other women into the UK. Certainly for sexual exploitation, it's something that we see quite commonly. But I do think that the stats would say that it's predominantly males that are certainly prosecuted for this more than females. But I do think that sadly they are involved.
Thanks, Emma. And I've got a question now for Natasha around the helpline. So someone has asked, how do you decide when and what information should be given to statutory agencies such as the police?
So usually it is, if we're speaking to an adult, we'll have their consent. If there's imminent risk to life, sometimes we have to waive consent and just refer anyway. Also, if they are minors, so if they're under 18, we will always report if concerns are raised. Any action we take is based on our do no harm or do no further harm approach.
Brilliant, thanks so much. And now a question for Debbie on the Navigator programme. Is it a requirement for victims to cooperate with an investigation in order to get Navigator support?
No, but what I would say is most of our referrals, all of our referrals come from policing. So we will go out, as Emma said, at that initial point of identification, but it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody then will engage. So we've gone with the police, but it doesn't necessarily mean they will engage with the criminal justice journey, but they will continue to receive the support from the Navigator. And the idea is that we really act as that bridge between the two, and hopefully by rebuilding that individual's self-esteem, and that will then empower them to engage with the criminal justice journey, because we build in that trust and helping them along that journey.
Thanks, Debbie. And just to add that we found that 95% of all victims that Navigators support then engage with the criminal justice system, compared to 44%.
Yeah, I mean, stats is, if you look at out of 10 victims, 4, if you don't have a Navigator involved, about 4 of them will engage with the prosecution, whereas if you have a Navigator involved, it's 9, which is huge. And is, as Emma said, you know, it's a bit of a no-brainer for police forces to engage with that process, because you just get it empowers the victim, they become stronger, you know, you hopefully see better prosecutions.
Emma's got her hand up. Emma.
Just on that point as well, I think one key thing to raise is how long a criminal justice process can take nowadays. Sometimes we're talking about anything between a year to sometimes 3 years. There's an awful backlog still because of COVID. Trials get delayed, they get moved, and for the police to keep engaged and a survivor on board for that long period of time is actually really hard. And that is really where victim navigators come in, or any other NGO out there that does the same kind of support. And I saw in one of the chats someone mentioned about IJM and Hope for Justice. We've worked with IJM as well with their their people out in Bucharest, and you know, they've done an equally amazing job for me on some of my personal cases as well out there. And if you, for example, it's good to mention that because I know you've got victim navigators out in Romania as well, but when someone does return home and they're repatriated, to kind of keep them on board whilst they're living in Romania, and we've got everything going on with our cases here in the UK, it's a really hard job, and that is absolutely where the victim navigators and the other NGOs that are involved shine, and keep up that communication, keep them abreast of what's going on, explain all the delays and how the court processes work, and also around the safeguarding of them as well.
Brilliant. And we've got just 5 more minutes, and quite a few people have been asking around how both the helpline and the navigator programme are funded. So Natasha, I'm going to come to you first. Someone's asked, they said you mentioned the helpline is independent. Can you explain how it's funded, but in just 1 minute, if that's okay?
Sure. So we don't receive any government funding. We are funded through a mixture of grants, a little bit of individual giving. We get some money from Unseen's business services, where we support businesses to tackle issues in their supply chains. And we also create bespoke reports of anonymised aggregate data around specific themes for organisations like the NCA, which they can use to, you know, improve their understanding of a particular issue and strategise. So as I mentioned, police are a major benefactor of helpline information. So it'd be really great if police and crime commissioners could find a little bit of room in their budget to donate to us, as our work really supports a lot of their policing priorities, such as, you know, gang violence and of course violence against women and girls.
Brilliant. And Debbie, so I'm actually on the fundraising team at Justice in Care, but I'm going to throw this one to Debbie and then I'll add. Who funds the navigators, Debbie?
Yeah, like Unseen, we don't have government funding. There's a lot of trust and foundations. Charlotte and her team do an absolutely incredible job, which I wouldn't want for all the tea in China, raising funds for us. So independently funded, independent donors, as I say, trust and foundations, and then Charlotte, you'll have to fill in the rest.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, we are funded by individuals giving very generously into the work. As Debbie said, we do receive some funding from police and crime commissioners. We want to see this programme roll out nationally, and are looking at what's the best sustainable model for that. But with 12 navigators in the UK, we want to see them in every police force. But we'd love to chat with you separately if you're interested, and of course with Unseen as well, from the funding point of view. Right, we've got 2 minutes, so I think we've got time just for one more question, and this is it can be a heavy topic, and so we like to end often with just some hope. So I'd just like to briefly, for 30 seconds from each panelist, love to hear what is bringing you hope in this fight against modern slavery in your area. So Emma, let's come to you first, putting you on the spot.
Thanks, Charlotte. Just more positive work going forward, more engagement. As many referrals that come through from the Modern Slavery Helpline, we will always look at and go and investigate. And if we can visit, then we will. More positive work alongside Justice in Care and the victim navigators. I'm hoping that those numbers might grow, that we're so busy in the Met Police, we have so many cases of modern slavery and referrals that come in. So yeah, just keep working hard, and keep working in partnership.
Thank you. Natasha, coming to you next.
I'd say our call volumes are constantly going up. So I'm hopeful that there's just greater awareness of modern slavery. It's in the media more, people are talking about it more, so hopefully that should help us tackle it.
Brilliant. And Debbie?
Well, I would say my hope comes from our survivors that have been on that journey and how empowered they are. And only this morning I was talking to one of my navigators who was telling me about one of their ladies who we've been supporting for a couple of years, and she's Romanian, has gone out and found herself another job, but within 48 hours realised that she was being exploited again, and has come back to us saying, I need help again. But for me, the hope there is, because of the work that's been done, she identified the vulnerability of the situation she was in and was able and strong enough to move herself out of it and come away from it. And for me, it's about hope in people, and just all the work that everybody is doing across the board in this field, how we're empowering people to stand up and protect themselves as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Emma, Natasha, Debbie, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm inspired by all that you're doing, I'm sure with everyone else on this call. So it's been great to be able to celebrate what you're doing, and also the survivors who have been standing up for justice and finding freedom. So thank you to you all. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today for this hour, and also thank you for your support, which makes partnerships like this all possible. And I know we haven't got to all the questions today, so please get in touch with us both at Unseen and Justice and Care, and we would love to chat further. And it would be amiss not just to end this call with reminding you what the number is for the Modern Slavery Helpline. So please get out your phones now, and Natasha, would you like to just remind us so that we can all save it in our phones right now?
By all means, it's 08000 121 700.
Brilliant.
Again, 08000 121 700.
Brilliant. Great. So I'll have that saved in my phone straight after this webinar. Thanks so much, Natasha. Thank you all again, and happy International Women's Day.